Right, good evening everybody and welcome to tonight's Development Control Committee. Just a few sort of housekeeping and safety announcements and then we'll proceed on to business. First things first, fire evacuation procedures for tonight. There are no fire alarms scheduled, so if there is a fire alarm sounding, it's for real. Please evacuate the building as soon as possible by the nearest available exits. There's a fire exit behind you in the public gallery and there's two fire exits behind us at this table. We'll meet in the Warmwall car park at the muster point. Second thing, webcast a meeting. So this meeting is being webcast live on the internet and will be available to view on YouTube after the meeting. Assuming our IT's working. Mobile phones, could I please ask that we all either switch off our mobile phones or put them to silent. That way we get disruption to a minimum. So in terms of the businesses in front of us tonight, the Development Control Committee is a quasi-judicial committee made up of councillors of all parties and groupings acting in an apolitical capacity. Decisions to be made tonight will be based on planning law, citing policies in the Basingstoke and Deane local plan, the more recent version that's been out for Regulation 18 consultation, and the National Planning Policy Framework, and of course local neighbourhood plans. Seated to my left are the planning officers, and to my right is the legal officer. We don't have a vice chair this evening. He's no longer on the council. Each application will be introduced by a planning officer. We'll then hear from parish councils, those speaking against, those speaking in favour, any ward councillors lined up to speak in advance. Each party will have 4 minutes each. We'll then have questions for the planning officers. If there are any, some may have been asked in advance of this meeting. We've also had a viewing panel where most of the applications tonight have been viewed. And then following that, we'll have a debate and move to vote. And we'll have the decision recorded after that. So with that preamble out of the way, we shall move on to the business of tonight's meeting. Do we have any apologies for absence? Don't think we have any, and I note that Councillor Bowes, you're deputised for Councillor Hussey. Excellent. Do we have any declarations of interest, councillors? Okay, there are none. We'll now move on to item 3, any urgent matters to update the committee with.
Thank you, Chair. It's just to draw to members' attention a recent appeal decision received yesterday, which concerns principle of development on a number of matters. That appeal was for a site known as Cranesfield, which was an application for 26 dwellings in Sherborne St John. The appeal was dismissed, but relevant to some of the items on your agenda this evening and future agendas. The conclusions of that appeal set out that the council can demonstrate a 4-year housing land supply, that the spatial strategy is consistent with the NPPF, that policies SS1 and SS6 are not considered to be out of date, and on that basis the tilted balance in paragraph 11 of the NPPF is not engaged. So that appeal decision was just received yesterday, so I bring it to members' attention.
Thank you very much. Moving on to the next item, minutes of the meeting held on the 10th of April, which we can consider for accuracy. Do I have a mover for the minutes? Councillor Miller, seconded Councillor Court. All those in favour of the minutes, please show. Okay, that's unanimous. So I shall now sign the minutes as a matter of true record and pass them over after the meeting. Right, which brings us to main business this evening, applications for planning permission. So in front of us tonight we have 7 applications, of which item 2 has been withdrawn, and item 5, which was a previous planning permission where the decision has been quashed, we shall take item 5 first. Application 5. So that is land east of King's Peace, Church Lane, Borkhurst, Hampshire. And brief reference to the update papers to see if we have got anybody down to speak for that. And if the officer presenting could introduce, please. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. The first item before you this evening is land east of King's Peace, Church Lane, Borkhurst, Hampshire. So the proposal seeks full planning permission for the erection of one dwelling. So if I take members' attention to the update paper, the site was subject to the site viewing that took place last Friday, and information on this can be found within the update paper. Also within the update paper, a comment was received from Councillor Minnisbound, which can be found within the update paper. It makes reference to an appeal decision, Witch Lane Farm on Deans Lane, also within the update paper. So taking on board these additional comments, there's no change to the overall recommendation. So the application is recommended for refusal for the reasons as set out in the agenda before you, relating to being outside the settlement policy boundary with no special circumstances. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. We have no parish council representative down to speak. We do have in support Caroline Downey and Simon Evans. Welcome to Development Control. If you'd like to come forward, and there's some chairs to the right with microphones set up for you. Yeah, those are the ones. So when you're seated and comfortably set up, you speak activating the mic, the right-hand button, and when you're ready and you press the mic, you have 4 minutes between you. Thank you very much.
Chairman, members, thank you for your time this evening, and also thank you very much to those who attended the site on Friday. To those who were unable to attend, the site is on paddock land purchased by the applicant's father nearly 50 years ago. It includes numerous outbuildings, including a barn and a stable. Immediately behind the site itself is a long-established vegetable garden and orchard. The application was approved in January this year under delegated powers. The reason it's here before you tonight is an admin error that did not record a neighbouring parish objection, which would have taken the objections to 4. Interestingly, I note that they're not here this evening. It is our opinion that the only direct neighbour who objected actually withdrew his objection and stated in his letter to the officer, "I have no objection to a dwelling being built on the paddock adjacent to my property." This would have kept the objections under 4. Regardless of what is passed, the report before you is favourable towards the application, with one small reason for refusal, that the application does not comply with SS1 and SS6. Courtesy of Mr Townsend's comment about the recent appeal decision, we believe that there's a discrepancy there, and that the housing land supply remains fairly tenuous and it can easily slip to sub 4 years. Therefore, we believe that this application should still be considered in light of that and in line with the original decision, delegated decision. In the delegated report from January, the officer clearly stated that the siting of the proposed dwelling would form part of the established cluster of development with no visual or physical separation. As such, the application site is not considered to be isolated. The report goes on to mention that the development would represent sustainable development as required by the NPPF and policy SD1. Why 2 months later is this now an isolated location that is no longer compliant with local plan policy SD1? We acknowledge that the paddock has not been designated as previously developed land. However, the land use at the rear of the site should surely mean that the plot already has a domestic residential use, and so we ask, where is the harm? Clearly, officers agree. There is no harm to the following. The landscape officer gave no objection. Highways gave no objection. Biodiversity gave no objection as the scheme complies with policy. It meets all the design and amenity criteria as well as NPPF policies. Single dwellings continue to provide the council with much needed housing. The housing land position, not up for debate, we believe is tenuous. And yet, when the scheme was granted, the position enabled it to be assessed very differently. We ask that you as members consider the benefits of the dwelling that has no overriding harm and that you approve the application before you on the grounds that the dwelling will contribute to the borough's housing needs and cause no harm. I'll now pass you over to Mr. Evans.
Thank you, Caroline. As Caroline said, I inherited this piece of land from my dad, as well as his love for organic farming and looking after the countryside. I live with my mum in Tadley, so when we finally received the approval to build this small house for me in January, we were absolutely thrilled. We started making plans, but then a month later received the terrible news that the council had made a mistake, and I was given 5 working days to get legal advice because the approval was to be overturned by the High Court. I simply had no idea such a thing was possible, and since receiving that letter in February, my life has been turned into an absolute nightmare of disappointment, stress and uncertainty for both myself and my elderly mum. I've been prescribed anxiety medication, and I've received no apology or support whatsoever from the council. To be given approval and then a month later have it taken away is just so unjust. Therefore, I respectfully ask the committee to uphold the original decision which was given to me in January and once again approve the application. As Caroline mentioned, we wonder why the parish who objected at that very last minute took nearly 9 months to file their objection and why they're not here this evening to speak. We've been put through absolute hell because of this. So
afraid
please
you're out of time.
let me draw a line under this dreadful chapter of my life. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for your contribution. Councillors, do we have any questions, please? See, there are no hands raised. Thank you very much for your contribution. And Councillor Joe Slimming. Welcome to DC. When you're seated and set up, you'll have 4 minutes.
Colleagues, you will know by now that the only reason I come to speak to you at these meetings is when I feel the recommendation for the application before you needs to have a local context, and it may be based on faulty or challengeable reasons. Today, the application before you not only ticks those boxes, but in my opinion is a total miscarriage of justice. In 41 years as a town councillor commenting on planning applications, this is a new situation to me, and I expect to others that once granted a decision can be quashed. So here are the reasons why I believe you should now grant this application and see justice prevail. You have seen the facts. The applicant was submitted in April 23, and because my resident allowed delays due to staff absence, it was not determined and was finally granted under delegated powers on the 18th of January 24. On 16th of February 24, the head of planning and infrastructure informed my resident that the decision had been unlawful due to a council error, and the High Court was to be asked to quash it. Advice in that letter was to seek legal opinion, and you've heard from my resident that in fact the cost of that was prohibitive, and I'm sure all of you haven't got many thousands of pounds to do so. In that letter, I quote, it was advised, "We would hope that your client would agree that it is ultimately in their interest to have the application determined in accordance with the Constitution and ask you give consideration to consent to judgment. Generally, the court's approach to honest mistakes is to put the parties back into the position they would have been without the mistake, i.e. to quash the decision granted in error," and there is a case law quoted. However, this is not the case, as the applicant is now being recommended for refusal. It is my understanding that applications made prior to December 23 were treated as per the NPPF guidance at that time, and that a guidance note published on the 5th of February 24 states that para 76 of the NPPF is not a material consideration for applications made before the 19th of December 23. There are no other reasons for refusal in the current officer's report other than under the new rules, even with the further late objection now added. And therefore, you should, in my opinion, be basing your decision on the officer's report in January 24 to approve, as no other reasons for refusal have been indicated.
1 minute left.
This would put my resident back into the position he was in January 24. Then he was delighted, as he told you, to have permission to build a new home and was making plans to do so. Obviously, this new decision in January meant that his dreams were shattered. Please put him back in the same position as before, and as for the guidance on applications before the 19th of December 23. This will not take away the stress and trauma suffered by him and his family through the council's error. When contacted by Mr Evans in February about this, I was extremely upset and embarrassed myself that he'd been placed in this position, and I hope the council will put matters right and my colleagues will see that justice needs to be served. Please take note of the decision that needs to be made today, and that man in the street would see that fairness and justice is prevailed here this evening. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You are out of time now. Councillors, any questions for Councillor Slimming? I see any hands raised at this point. Councillor Miller, do you have a question? No? Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Slimming. Questions for officers? Councillor Bound.
Yes, I wonder whether the head of planning could sort of reiterate to the planning committee that legal decision that was made, which overcame the original application in the approval decision.
Thank you, Councillor Bound. In essence, the legal decision made was to quash the original grant of planning permission for the reason set out in terms of the administrative error. What that means is that the application is returned to the council for redetermination. So for the position that the local planning authority needs to take is to consider the application as of today, making a decision today based on the material considerations and policies applicable today, irrespective of previous circumstances.
So just to be clear, we can't take into account anything that's gone before, it's just what we have in front of us now.
Correct.
Any further questions, councillors? Councillor Miller?
Yes, I'd like to ask, is the whole principle of SS6, because we're back to SS6 on this isolated in the countryside, it is purely on the basis of that policy and notwithstanding anything to do with the housing land supply. So it's the argument purely is with no landscape issues raised at all. It's purely on the policy of SS6.
That is correct, Councillor. So there's no landscape harm being identified or otherwise, but in a plan-led system, the harm, if you like, is the fact that it's contrary to the development plan in terms of its development in the countryside that doesn't fit within the exception set out in policy SS6. So for that reason, and as I mentioned before, because we can demonstrate a housing land supply policy, SS6 is considered up to date, and on that basis, that's the reason for the recommendation now for refusal.
Councillor Court?
Can you just clarify where we are with Tadley's statement, they object? Does that still stand, please?
So the objections that were listed still stand. They weren't withdrawn. They still stand.
That's fine, thank you.
No further questions. Councillor House-Sorrell?
Sorry, this would have been one for the site visit. How far away is this likely to be if it gets built? Not likely to be. How far away will it be from the next nearest dwelling, roughly? I know it's next door, but are we talking sort of 10 metres or are we talking 100 metres?
No, there is a neighbouring dwelling right to the side of it. If you want to bring up a block plan. application plan. Yeah. Yeah. An exact distance to it. Okay. Okay, so 18 metres to the boundary.
No more questions, so I'll throw it open to debate. Councillor Miller.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, when we all examined this, it did sound a bit of a nightmare, but we simplified it in that we've got an application before us. We went on a site visit, and once again, I'll emphasise how important site visits are. You get an appreciation of the relevance of a proposal to its surroundings. I keep saying that 2D photographs don't cut it. Okay, it's useful to have measurements, but to see the context of the application, and yes, there's some passionate views have been put forward about the circumstances of what's going on, but I tend to look at it from the planning perspective, and over the years that I've been on this committee, we've looked at SS6, we've wrestled with it because it's sometimes it's a good thing, other times probably not so good because it's hard to write a rule that fits all. So it's context, context, context. In this particular case, I know it was referred to cultivated land which is outside the application site. However, it is connected, it's in the ownership of the applicant, and the visibility to the next door dwelling is shaded. When you stand on the application site, all you see is just below the eaves of the adjacent properties with a very high boundary fence. On that basis, I'm prepared to support a recommendation for approval for this particular site and this particular application that's been submitted. I'm obviously going to be guided by officers, but I would turn around, and you want a reason for approval, I would turn around the reason for refusal, and it does not compromise the policy of SS6.
Thank you, Councillor Miller. Was there any officer comments at that point?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Miller. And I understand the point raised about the physical attributes of the site and what you saw on site in terms of how it's viewed, etc. I think the issue is, and bring members back as always, to the fact that planning decisions have to be made in accordance with the development plan unless material considerations indicate otherwise. And in essence, for it to comply with SS6, it would need to fit one of those criteria, that it's, it meets a local need, which it hasn't been demonstrated in this, that it's on previously developed land, that it's for an agricultural workers dwelling, etc. It doesn't fall within those, so it's not capable in that sense of being considered in accordance with policy SS6. So there would need to be an overriding material consideration as to why it would be effectively contrary to the development plan in that regard.
Yeah, I regret that I don't have my local plan and policies with me. I had them in my hands this afternoon, but I didn't bring them to the meeting this afternoon. I know that all the there's a lot of subsections to SS6, but I don't know if I could be advised of anything.
I'm sure we can advise you, yeah.
Thank you, Councillor. So effectively, the policy SS6 says the development proposals for new housing outside settlement boundaries will only be permitted where they are, and then there's several criteria on previously developed land, and then there's sub-criteria to that, but I'm just going to stick to the main points. On previously developed land, for a rural exception site for affordable housing, for reuse of a redundant or disused permanent building, for a replacement dwelling that is not temporary in nature, etc., for small-scale residential development and small scale is less than 4, where it's demonstrated that they meet a locally agreed need, which hasn't happened on this occasion, for a new dwelling linked to an existing viable agricultural, forestry, horse breeding and training use, and where it's allocated for development in a neighbourhood plan. So that is the limitations, if you like, of policy SS6 as to what can be considered, and the report effectively sets out that none of those criteria are met in terms of it being within SS6, even though SS6 in itself can provide circumstances where development in the countryside is acceptable, but it's only on those criteria. Does that help?
It helps to a degree, yes. It's you know how long I've been involved in this. It's always been difficult to wrestle with this one. It's just that I'll listen to the views of other members of the committee, but this was one case where I think the harm wasn't there, and I think that's what it comes down to. But I've made a proposal, whether it gets supported or otherwise, or I'm advised by officers it's going nowhere because it's policy, I'm prepared to listen to everything.
Okay, we'll continue on that basis. Anybody else wish to contribute or second? Councillor Court?
Just going to add, I support Councillor Miller's viewpoint entirely. I was on the bus, I had to wander around. I think this is one of these cases we should look at carefully in light of SS6. Thank you.
So, Councillor Miller, I've been advised to ask, are you still prepared to move this recommendation on the basis of the advice that you've received, that there are criteria in SS6, but the officer's view is it doesn't fulfil any of them?
I think it's fairly obvious I can't do that because we have to go along with policy. I even chair the committee that development policies in this local plan. So, notwithstanding, I've had my say. And I withdraw that the recommendation that I put forward before. Thank you.
Well, thank you for that, and I appreciate the sympathies of people in the committee on this. Councillor Bound, you had your hand raised there.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I mean, I agree with what Councillor Miller has said and Councillor Court, but I think we're stuck with the stuck with the policies. We have had a recently approved by the council sort of local plan. It's gone to Reg 18, and I think to start shooting holes through it straight away is not a very sensible way forward. Albeit that we're having a great deal of difficulty with this particular application. I mean, I don't think that this particular application is isolated. It's very close to the house next door, which is very close to the house next door, which has just been built. And over the way, there's another house being built, Coombs Farmhouse. Just down the way, there's another big house, which is not long being built. And then we've got the settlement of Browning Hill. And we're not very far from Charter Alley either, where there is a village shop and there's a pub. And down the way, we've got a church. So I don't think it's an isolated it would be an isolated building in the countryside either. But at the same time, it is in the countryside. So I'm not going to move approval of the officer recommendation. I'd like to see if anybody else has got anything else to say, but I'm very uncomfortable with it.
Yes, thank you for that, Councillor Bound. Do we have any more people wishing to speak at this point? We do need a proposal on the table. Nobody else. Councillor Howell-Sorrell?
I'm just having a look through the local plan. I've seen plenty of recommendations for approval come through over the years and plenty for refusal. And my understanding is that it's all done on balance. And if we can, if I am of the belief that on balance, it is in line with more policies that I provide more weight to, in my view, that override the balance for SF6, can I move approval on those grounds? For example, EM1, it's not harmful to the character of the landscape. And on balance, that's more important, because I don't see SS6 as being a strong enough reason on its own. We've refused things for stronger reasons, and we have not refused things for weaker for reasons this week before. I think it's a fairly weak reason as the only reason for refusal. So am I able to move a motion for approval on those grounds?
Well, I'll allow Mike to come in on that one.
Thank you, Councillor Howard-Sorrell. I'll go back to the previous advice, I suppose, in terms of it's in accordance with the development plan, unless there's any other material considerations. I think the only means by which you could, because policy SS6 is dealing with the principle of development, so beyond what are then the physical impacts, which is things like policy EM1 in terms of landscape impact, etc., it's dealing with the principle of development. So there would have to be, not to get to a position of approval, there would have to be an acknowledgement of the departure, effectively, from the development plan in terms of SS6, i.e. it's development in the countryside which is not supported by SS6, and that there was some overriding material consideration which meant that that was acceptable. And that's the point, I suppose, that the report hasn't been able to find. The fact that it's not harmful in itself is not sufficient to get to that place. Different, if you like, for example, is a situation where there's a significant eyesore on the site that was being tidied up, etc., and therefore there was a material benefit that outweighed the contradiction of the development plan, but that position doesn't persist in this circumstance. Does that assist at all?
You can come back if you want, Councillor Howard-Sorrell.
So our hands are completely bound here. We can't override the plan, even if we acknowledge the fact that we are overriding it, or can we? Can we override it and acknowledge that we've overridden it, but we think because it's in the best interests of...
We would need a policy reason that we can demonstrate is sufficient to override it, yes. Councillor Freeman, you had your hand raised.
Thank you. I'm just thinking that surely the whole point of DC is to look at cases on an individual basis that are completely exceptional to other planning law, and that's the whole point of us. Otherwise, there's no point in a committee. And so surely there must be some way that we can look past this and see justice done for this, because honestly, it is very exceptional. We made a mistake which has reversed this decision, and it doesn't sit with me to refuse this. It really doesn't. And I do think that, given that it was our mistake in the first place, we really need to be doing something other than just refusing it like this. It just doesn't seem fair. It does not sit with me at all.
Okay, so I'll let you come in a few minutes, a few seconds, Councillor Howard-Sorrell. So I think the mood of the committee is such, and I sympathise enormously, that the principles of natural justice have to be seen to be upheld here. And unfortunately, we're in a position where this application was previously determined under the old local plan, the old policies, and even an older version of the national policy planning framework, and they have since changed. So the goalposts have changed twice, and now we're considering this application against a new framework. It's really within the remit of the committee. If somebody moves it to say, in this particular case, we're deviating from it, but this is a reason that we feel is justified. If we can do that, then we'll have a live proposal we can move and second and vote on.
I'm quite happy to move a motion on those grounds.
Okay, so we'd need to have the reason for approval then. So I think we've got a planning officer input at this point.
Thank you, Chair. For those of you in the room, I'm Jenny Jackson. I'm Head of Planning and Infrastructure for the Council. Thank you for letting me come in at this point. I thoroughly appreciate the difficulties that you are clearly having. As the Chair has set out, a belief that there is a justice that should prevail when, unfortunately, we're in the position as a planning authority where the application has to be determined with reference to the development plan, as Mike has already set out to you. I think the challenge we therefore have is that the development plan says this is outside settlement policy boundaries, there are a very limited set of circumstances in policy SS6 where development would be permitted. And I think criteria E, which Mike identified when he read that out, what's lacking for this particular application is any evidence of a local need. And the explanatory text talks about that being something which is discussed with the parish council, who've objected to the application. So we are collectively, I think, in a difficult position. I just wanted, Chair, to encourage the committee to have regard to its own policies in the adopted local plan. That should be your starting point for making decisions. I appreciate that that might mean that's a difficult decision for the committee to take.
Okay, I have a question on that point. You said the adopted local plan and not the plan that's currently undergoing consultation. But the adopted local plan is the previous plan.
So, Chair, the adopted local plan is the development plan for the borough. So the plan that's recently been out to Regulation 18 consultation is only a material planning consideration. It's not something that's afforded the weight of development plan policy until it's actually been adopted by the council, which is not likely to be in the next 12 months. So we are talking about policy SS6. That's what this application will turn on.
Councillor Miller?
I have another question, so on top of the discussion that's ongoing, Chair, if I may, and it's probably aimed at Anne, is that would we be deemed unlawful if we overturned this recommendation?
I don't know whether I'd say it's unlawful, but, you know, I suppose one of the issues is it a departure from the development plan and does it need to be notified as such? You then have the risk as well that perhaps an objector, maybe one of the parish councils that have objected, might seek to challenge the decision. We don't know that, but it could happen.
And on that, I get a sense that at least one of you might want to move a recommendation. If an application is approved, the only way an approved application can be overturned is through judicial review. So if the parish council has objected to it, it's within their gift to take it to JR. But, you know, little e in policy SS6, are we content, whoever's moving, seconding, voting on it, are we content that that's going to be enough for that decision? If so, we'll proceed on that basis.
On that basis, Chair, I'd like to move the recommendation for approval, bearing in mind that we are deviating from planning policy SS6. I think that's enough of a statement I need to make.
I thank you for that. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Howard Sorrell? Okay, we will move to vote. Oh, before we move to vote.
Sorry, Chair, I'm genuinely not trying to elongate this any more than necessary, but I think two things to note. One is in terms of the reason for approval, it needs to state something as to the reason why. In terms of the, so it's contrary to SS6, but then the reason why in this particular case it's considered to be acceptable to the committee as a material consideration. The other point from a procedural point of view is that if that was the case, the one thing that we would need to do is advertise it as a departure from the development plan if that is the basis on which the decision is being made. So that is something that would have to occur after the event of this committee. If that's the decision that comes forward, that would mean that it obviously be advertised for a period of time, and if there were then further points raised, it would have to come back to committee again. So I have to make that point from a procedural position.
Okay, yeah. Mike has got some words which hopefully will assist us in this framing of reasons and departure from policy.
Chair, it's not so much advice, it's more in terms of just trying to capture what's been said more than anything. As I understand it, and it's for members to obviously put this forward in terms of the reasons for approval, as I understand it, your starting point, Councillor Miller, was the particular physical context of the site. That was what you said about the viewing. I don't know whether that was the overriding point around how this particular site is seen. You viewed the site, it's whether it's that particular point that you're picking up, because as we said, the circumstances of the case cannot be the material consideration that comes into the reasons for approval. It needs to be a planning material consideration that you would be stating as the overriding departure from SS6.
Well, could I start off by saying, and I'll, in fact, I'll take the words, my mic's on.
Yeah.
That Councillor Bound mentioned, it's not isolated within the countryside. As far as the, I think isolated is probably the most important one because it is adjacent to other buildings that have been there an awful long time, because King's Peace started off as a small building, but it's expanded since, but it's been there many, many decades. There are no landscape issues. That's a bit of the negative. But the positive side comes under the isolation. It's near to local amenities. Yes, I note that in the objection it's down a narrow lane. Well, it's a narrow lane for all the other properties that are down there. So that reason for access, limited access, I don't think stands anyway. How am I doing?
Thank you, Councillor. So, effectively, as I understand it, it's been moved for approval as departure from policy SS6 on the basis that the particular circumstances of the site being not isolated, though within the countryside, significant proximity to adjoining properties, that there's no landscape harm and that there's proximity to local amenities as a collective of issues is your reason for material consideration beyond the development plan.
That's coming from me. If I have some very knowledgeable colleagues surrounding me that if they would come to contribute, and especially Councillor Bounders, as he's one of the ward councillors.
Chair, that would then be on the basis that it would
close
before
to
the motion's voted on, if it's seconded, that would be on the basis of it then needing to be advertised as a departure and returned to committee if there were new material considerations raised in response to that consultation process.
So, Councillor Howard Sorrell, then Councillor Court.
I suspect I know the answer, but it would bring me a great deal of joy if we could include a reason for approval, being it would help maintain the land supply, because we've had a number of opportunistic developers come through and ram things down our throats because we haven't been able to demonstrate a land supply. So if we could use it, I'm seeing heads being shaken. If we could use it in our favour for once, it would be lovely, but I suspect we can't.
I'm afraid now that we only have to demonstrate a 4-year land supply, that's already demonstrated, so that's beyond dispute. I'm afraid we can't use that. Councillor Court, yeah, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. The fact we've gone this route, I presume, will be shared with Tadley, who objected to the scheme.
Yeah, the decision, once it reached that stage, not necessarily the resolution, but the decision would be shared, but it would, as I say, it would be advertised as a departure as well, so it would go to that period of consultation.
Thank you very much, that's fine.
Okay, I don't think we've got anyone else wanting to speak now, so we shall move to vote. We have a motion in favour of approval, as I think it was seconded by Councillor Howard Sorrell. I made a note of that. If not, Councillor Court will second it. So if we move to vote, those in favour, please show. For approval. So that's carried. Anyone against? Any abstentions? 1. Okay, if we could have the decision, please.
Thank you, Chair. To confirm that application is recommended for approval for the reasons set out by the committee in regards to departure from development plan and isolation. So that's subject to the advertisement process. As it will be subject to some conditions, just some standard ones. So 1 would be approved plans, 2 expiry time, 3 materials, 4 hard and soft landscaping, 5 security lighting to be provided, that's in regards to biodiversity, 6 hours of delivery, 7 hours of construction, 8 site access, 9 hard standing and parking provision, 10 cycle parking provision, 11 bin provision, 12 biodiversity enhancement and management plan, 13 mitigation method statement for Great Crested Newts, 14 biodiversity mitigation details, 15 water efficiency standards, and 16 electric vehicle charging point to be provided. Thank you, Chair.
Right, thank you very much. So that's application number 5 determined. Next up, we go to the first on the list, which is land north of the chalet, Newbury Road, Headley. Now, this is deferred item, so we don't have any speakers lined up tonight because they've already spoken. If we could have Nicola introduce, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. This application, as Chair mentioned, was viewed last Friday, and to note on the update, the parish have now withdrawn their objection to the proposal. The agent has written in to the council to highlight the benefits of the scheme and how the application has changed since members deferred the application first time round back in January 23. The agent also refers to the council not being able to demonstrate a 4-year housing land supply and quotes the Cranesfield development for the 26 houses, which has been obviously mentioned previously and was dismissed yesterday, where the council can now demonstrate a 4-year housing land supply and that its spatial strategy is consistent with the NPPF, and that policies SS1 and 6 are not out of date and the tilted balance is not engaged. So this additional information received has been already addressed within the officer report, and the recommendation for the proposal still remains for refusal for the 3 reasons outlined in the officer's report.
Right, thank you very much. So we've got no speakers lined up. So, members, do we have any questions for officers? Okay, I see no hands raised at this point, in which case I shall move it on to debate. Does anyone want to go first? Okay, we've got Councillor Miller, would you like to speak?
Yeah, I'd like to speak, Chair, but I think you've gathered there's not a lot in the debate, but I'll move the officer's recommendation.
Gratefully noted. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Howell-Sorrell. Okay. Moved and seconded. We shall now move to vote. All those in favour, please show. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay. Any against? None. Abstentions? 1. Okay. If we could have the decision recorded, please.
The application is refused for the 3 reasons outlined on the officer report.
Thank you very much. So next item up is 23657 Full Woodgarston Farm, Kingsclear Road, Upper Wootton. If we could have the officer introduction, please.
This application is for the conversion, adaptation and replacement of existing farm buildings to provide a farm shop with ancillary cafe, a new access which is to the north of Old Landis Bungalow, and parking and landscaping within the site. Members viewed it last Friday, but only in terms of where the proposed access was going to come from. In terms of the update, I think, and in reference to obviously comments that are already within the officer's report, Hampshire County Council have obviously fully considered the highway safety of the pedestrian crossing as part of the proposal, and the location, the exact location of the crossing, and the proposed pedestrian visibility displays. The proposals are considered would improve the crossing of the A339 for the people using the boat number 9, would provide, as I say, new bus stops and a wider dedicated walking connections either side of the A339 where none currently exist. They would provide improved visibility displays as well as pedestrian refuge within the centre of the carriageway, enhancing the safety of the existing users of the boat and how they currently cross the A339. Within the officer's report, I'm just sort of emphasising again, it's just that the county recognise that many trips to and from the site are likely to occur by car. Cycling is feasible, but realistically, that would be by a more experienced cyclist. And they also recognise that the scheme is within walking distance of the Many Down development, and obviously there are existing public footpaths and other rights of way which would enable users of the footpath to then visit the site. Also to note that recently there's also a new bus service, the number 32, between Newbury and Basingstoke, and this now runs past the site, and it runs every hour, 7 days a week, which obviously improves the sustainability of the site. That's the end of the update, and the recommendation is for approval subject to the application, securing a legal agreement as outlined on the officer report.
Excellent, thank you very much. In terms of people lined up to speak, we don't have parish council. We do have Mr. Barry Walker speaking in objection. Is Barry Walker here? Okay, and we've got 6 people in support: Simon Packer, Tom Newey, Simon Brown, Steve Jenkins, Matt Taylor and David Neil Smith. If you would all like to approach and seat to the right. The reason why I say that is if you are called on to answer questions, you need to be seated. We can't call back. Okay, welcome to Development Control. When you're ready, the mic is operated by the button to your right, and when you start speaking, you'll have 4 minutes between the 5 of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Good evening, councillors. My client, Many Down Rural Estate, welcomes your professional officer's recommendation to approve, as well as the significant number of local residents that have written in support of the application. The estate is proud to be an integral part of the local environment and community throughout the parishes of Wootton St Lawrence, Withrandall and Monk Sherborne. As well as its farming activity and countryside stewardship, it aims to extend and improve facilities such as the proposed farm shop by utilising redundant buildings and enhancing access to the countryside. It is not the intention to repeat the thorough assessment of relevant material considerations within the detailed committee report. However, there are some matters that we would consider important to highlight. Firstly, the proposal is a consequence of the necessary relocation of the existing farm shop at Scraps Hill Farm, Worting, that closed last year. The existing shop was located within the Many Down strategic development site and ultimately would have been displaced. Equally, the fabric of the building was poor and inefficient, and it made it very expensive to run with increased energy costs. Relocating to the proposed location will re-provide the shop by utilising and adapting existing redundant farm buildings. Through diversifying the offer, it will generate an additional 15 full-time equivalent employment positions within significantly more efficient buildings. The proposal therefore creates employment and investment in the local economy and facilitates the diversification of the rural economy. This is important given the current challenging climate for farming and agriculture, and such diversification is supported by development plan policy and national guidance. Secondly, the existing farm access into the proposed site is unsuitable due to poor visibility. Our proposals are for a new safe access 400 metres east of Woodgaston in the same location as the access to the South East Waters treatment plant and close to the existing byway open to all traffic or boat. This access is an entirely standard design and will incorporate an improved crossing of the A339 for users of the boat, new bus stops and dedicated footways on either side of the A339 where neither currently exist. It will provide clear visibility displays across the A339 in all directions, as well as a pedestrian refuge within the centre of the carriageway, enhancing the safety for users of the boat. Importantly, Hampshire County Council Highways, as professional advisors of the Council on all matters related to highway safety, have confirmed the design complies with all relevant safety criteria and raise no objection. Thirdly, the proposals have been carefully designed to minimise impact on the wider countryside and the existing Shedwood Ancient Monument. Through the removal of some key buildings, the use of high-quality materials and the addition of significant landscaping, the proposals will blend successfully into their setting. Historic England raised no objection, thank you, to the proposal, recognising the opportunity to enhance the setting of the Shedwood Ancient Monument. Equally, no objection is raised by the Council's Landscape Officer or Biodiversity Officer. Finally, the proposals are deliberately well integrated into the existing rights-of-way network. They should encourage greater walking and cycling to and from the new facility and promote rural tourism. The recently enhanced bus service will improve accessibility by non-car modes, with adjacent bus stops relocated to provide direct and safe access via proposed footways to the new shop and cafe. The proposals have evolved following detailed negotiation with officers and key consultees. It is the professional opinion of your officers that the application should be approved. My client endorses this conclusion and respectfully requests that permission is granted. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do we have any questions, councillors, for the team in front of us in support? I don't see any hands raised, so thank you very much for your contribution. Yeah, you can sit down now. Thanks very much.
Okay, thank you.
Do we have any questions for officers, councillors? Councillor Miller.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I got a question to officers about some of the wording in the report. On page 200 and page 201. As we never have paragraph numbers in here, I'll try and get us to the right place. The penultimate paragraph on page 200, I read here, and we've seen it all before, transport assessment, says that about the accident assessments that are conducted by the Highways Authority. Well, that's the assessment now. This proposal will draw in a completely different traffic pattern. It will draw in people to the cafe, which I've got no real problem with about the actual site. It's about the access. And to have an assessment like this, knowing what's going to happen on the site, I think is very misleading. You can do assessments now in the world today, but this will change the world of traffic around that particular area. So I question the validity of that particular paragraph without some comment by officers. The next one is in page 201, accessibility and travel plan. And the officer presenting actually mentioned it. And yes, I just cannot see, and again, site visit. We went on a site visit, and yet we see in the report that the statement is made is it's considered that on road cycling should be feasible, but realistically with only the more confident and experienced cyclists. I'm sorry, but that is a very dangerous statement to make, because that's a very individual type of assessment that anybody makes. The poor unwary cyclist who doesn't follow that is going to get themselves into trouble. And unless you get a dedicated cycle access to this particular site, I'm afraid I go back to the previous comment, that accident rate is going to go up. All you have to do, all members of this committee know the A339, and we witnessed it on the site visit. There was nothing but fast traffic coming around. I look at visibility displays. There's traffic coming over a hump in the road down to that particular site. Now, please, can I have an explanation from officers, this is my question, of why those words appear in here and expect them to be adhered to by more confident and experienced cyclists? What if they aren't? And this gets approved and you get an unexperienced cyclist killed there.
Thank you, Councillor Miller, and I think I'll try and take the various points raised in turn, so in terms of the paragraphs that you've referenced, etc. The first one, I think, was the reference to the why the transport assessment includes accident data in terms of the existing position compared to ultimately what's predicted. The simple answer, I suppose, in that is that the transport assessment will always have to consider context of the existing position, look at that sort of data as a baseline, and then build upon that in terms of then the proposal. So that's the main reason why that is in there. Turning to the point around access and the wording that we put in the report around the likelihood of access for cycling, I think the point that we were simply trying to raise was that it's acknowledged the fact that it's not a destination where there will be frequent cyclists for the reasons you've outlined, because of the nature of the A339, etc. The way that the application has been assessed is very much looking at the totality of the transport implications of the site. So that is looking at how it's accessed by car, and the report acknowledges the fact that actually probably use of the private car is likely to be the most prevalent in this particular circumstance because of the location. But where it is going to be supported by alternative modes, most likely that's going to be the bus, and we've already heard about the increased bus service, etc., the proposals in terms of how they deal with the bus stops and the accessibility in terms of the links through, the improvements to the visibility displays to facilitate that car access and the removal of the sort of informal HGV parking, which is a current hindrance, if you like, and then going full circle back to the non-vehicular traffic, so pedestrians, etc. The way that's been approached is very much thinking around, well, if there were then people who made that choice, and as you say, it's an individual choice as to whether people would, we don't anticipate this being a significant driver for that type of movement. But where it is, the proposal then includes the uncontrolled crossing, uncontrolled insofar as it's not signalised, but clearly that's a far improved situation to an existing situation where people using the boat have to effectively cross the A339 with no crossing point at all. So at the moment, as you've seen from the site viewing, there is simply nothing there. You just have to wander across backwards and forwards. So that is effectively the way in which it's been assessed, and all of that has been worked through in terms of the transport assessment. It forms our assessment as to why we consider it acceptable under policy CN9, which is about how the site is accessed by all modes of transport, and sort of supporting that, I suppose, is the fact that then Hampshire County Council's Highway Authority haven't objected to the scheme having gone through that in various iterations, including, on, as set out on page 200, the fact that a road safety audit and designer's response has been looked at as well in terms of the access arrangements. So in terms of the sort of thoroughness, I suppose, that's been gone through, this has been looked at, you know, in considerable detail. Appreciate that members will have their views on the acceptability or otherwise.
Yes, of course.
I didn't raise the issue about the site, but they're providing 16 cycle stands in the site for their staff and people who want to go there. That means they're almost encouraging cyclists to use it. But the point I think I was trying to bring to the attention through the question was that from the perspective of the A339, that's one of the hairiest roads, excuse the expression, that we've got in the vicinity of Basingstoke. And when you talk about the uncontrolled crossing, that gave us even more doubts, because surveys, try going up that road and that stretch of road in either the morning or the evening, dodging the HGVs. And a cyclist can't react like a car can coming out of those particular accesses. And that was raised by all of us on the site.
Councillor Bound?
Thank you, Chair. Could the officer tell me whereabouts are the bus stops in relation to the crossing, please?
Sorry, members. So where the red dot is hovering, so obviously where you've got the pedestrian refuge, which is just to the left of that dot, and then you've got the sort of the foot. So you've got the existing boat crossing from the south, going south northwards, and then you've got the extended footpath to the south of the 339, which obviously meets to the pedestrian refuge, and then you've got sort of an enlarged bay for the proposed bus stop, and then opposite that you've got one on the opposite side of the road with an extended footpath link, which then continues to the footpath that's going to be created parallel with the internal access road. If that helps.
Councillor Court?
Thank you, Chair. Regards to the point raised by Councillor Bound, that bus you're talking about is going to pull in on the same side of the road as the access, the current access roads, which is where agricultural vehicles go up as well. It will inevitably block access looking up the road and certainly down the road from there. So I'm presuming that's taken into account of.
Is there a question in that? Yeah.
The bus stop is further east of the access, so it won't be in the way, to answer your question.
I'll leave the point at that, just points raised. Thank you.
Any more questions, anyone? So we've had concerns and questions about the road safety aspects and the crossing A339. Those who are visiting were acutely aware of that. Confident cyclist, if we use peace term for cycling, it'd be a black run skier doing that. But I think we can only go by the advice in front of us on that, I'm afraid. There being no more questions, I'll throw it open to debate. Does anyone wish to participate in the debate? Councillor Howard Sorrell.
Thank you, Chair. We've raised these points many times before about Hampshire Highways not necessarily providing as much information as we would like, but unfortunately I don't think it's relevant to planning ever, so there's no reasons here to refuse, and it's obviously recommended for approval, so I'm happy to move the recommendation as set out in the report.
Thank you, Councillor Howard Sorrell. So we have a mover. Do we have anyone wanting to second? Prepared to second? Councillor Court.
I'm happy to second it.
Okay. I have a live proposal on the table. Those in favour, please show. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. Those against, please show. And any abstentions, please show. Okay, so that's carried. If we could have the decision, please.
The application is approved subject to the completion of the legal agreement.
Okay, that brings us on to application number 4, which is 23-00472/full, land at Upper Woodcott, Hampshire, in the ward of Evingar. If we could have Nicola to introduce, please.
The item number 4 is for the erection of a new farmhouse garage, farm building, together with a new access for residential purposes and associated landscaping. There's nothing to report on the update. The application is being recommended for refusal on the principle of a dwelling in a countryside location outside a settlement policy boundary without a justification, and the landscape harm and visual amenity harm caused by the significant size, scale and bulk of the dwelling that is in a prominent location within the area of outstanding national landscape.
Thank you very much. So we have, speaking for Parish Council, James Nicholson. James, if you'd like to approach, welcome to Development Control. So when you're seated comfortably, press the button on your right to activate the mic, and when you start speaking, you'll have 4 minutes. Thank you very much.
Good evening, Chairman, Councillors. I am James Nicholson. I'm the Chairman of the Lichfield and Woodcote Parish Meeting, and the property that we're considering, or you are considering, is in that parish. I've come this evening to confirm that the parish meeting is in full support of this application for the Crux Eastern Farm development. And the meeting was surprised that the planning officers have been recommending refusal, since there's been a house at that location for over 120 years, and that has a certificate for lawful use. In regards to the design of the property, again, I can confirm that the parish meeting has received no complaints or concerns about the design. And the fact is that the parish meeting itself found, with its unique knowledge of all the buildings in the parish, in both villages, that the design is in keeping. In all other matters relating to design, I believe that should be left to the architect, Robert Adam. And so I would like to thank you all for your time. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Do we have any questions for the Parish Council, councillors? Councillor Miller.
Thank you very much, Chair. Does the parish have much contact with the National Landscape of the North Wessex Downs? And did you have any dialogue with them over the design and position of this property?
The parish meeting is involved with that, not only with the local farms being in the local farm cluster and actually contributing towards that area. So all those parties are aware of it, and there's been no kind of complaints against it. And the visibility of the site is not an issue.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any further questions for Councillor Nicholson? Councillor Nicholson, thank you very much for your contribution. Okay, so I have 2 speakers lined up to object, Mrs. Joanna Strong and Mr. Carl Carrington. If you'd like to approach, please. Welcome to Development Control. When you're ready, press the button right hand side, and you'll have 4 minutes. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. Unfortunately, Mr. Carrington's stuck on a train trying to get back from Waterloo, so I will reiterate some of his comments on his behalf, if that's all right.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, thank you. although this property lies in the Lichfield Parish Council, actually I live in Binley, which is a mile down the road, which is actually closer to the site than the other supporters. We are just a mile down the hill and share the same access road, Binley Bottom. As a Binley resident, many of us use the footpath that the application is cited on. Contrary to the planning statement suggestion that the footpath to the west of the site is not frequently used, it most certainly is, and it's very dear to many people locally. And I'm really here to represent those who are passionate about the AONB and wish to preserve its beauty and specialness. Some were formally rejected, some didn't want to speak. It's a much loved, totally unspoilt corner where, and I'm a veterinary surgeon, we see a lot of wildlife which is unique to these habitats. Siting within the AONB will, as the landscape officer says, be harmful and adversely impact the existing quiet, unspoilt character of this sensitive, nationally designated landscape. And that counts as your policy EM1 of the local plan. It will be harmful to the wildlife, especially the excessive hard-standing square footage and the rather luxurious new road, access road. And we will lose a stunning 360-degree view that we get from the top of the boat that crosses from Binley to Croxeaston as we look down over the site. Obviously, the site is isolated in its location, and that reduces its sustainability. The scale of the development is disproportionate to the original hut that it's about 800 square foot. This will, with the hard standing, etc., will be about 10 times that. Not even on the original footprint, which is tucked discreetly into one corner of the site, as I'm sure anyone who's visited it has seen, but it will be invading the adjacent agricultural field. The requirement for a farm building of that size is tenuous. There's no requirement for a parish hall that I can see justified clearly as part of the statement, or an educational facility. I'm sure they'd all be nice, but they haven't been justified, so they're just add-ons. And the planning statement admits that the landowner himself is not going to farm livestock, para 24.21 of his original planning statement. There are currently no stock on site, and so there isn't a requirement for an on-site presence, and they've owned it for 16, 18 years without having to be on site as an agricultural business. So overall, the size of the development is counter to policy M1, the local plan, and the North Wessex Downs AONB management plan. I would say the architecture isn't in keeping with anything else that I'm aware of locally.
1 minute left.
Thank you. Again, EM1. Mr. Carrington is an energy consultant. In his words, the fact that there is not a full and proper whole life carbon assessment of a development of this size is, in his words, is a catastrophe. He advises on these kinds of sites routinely, particularly the amount of earth movements required to create the site itself is actually considerable and really not alluded to fully and counted for in the plan. He'd expect exceptional energy carbon credentials to support something of such architectural merit. The report fails to commit to the occasion of, for instance, the photovoltaic flat panels in the middle of the lawn. It fails to demonstrate how the building complies with energy requirements set out in approved document Part L 2021. An EPC of A would be...
Afraid you're out of time.
Okay, thank you very much.
Councillors, do you have any questions for Mrs. Strong? I see shaking heads there. So thank you very much for your contribution.
Thank you.
And speaking in support, I have lined up Patrick Grinsell, Robert Adam, Mary Louise Aigri, and Hugo Haig, if you'd all like to approach the bench on your right. That's 5 people we had 4 down to speak.
Chair, can I explain? That's my colleague. We have some information that if members were minded to welcome it, we could distribute it. If that's not appropriate, then my colleague can sit back.
I'm afraid it's not appropriate, and
Okay.
he's not down to speak, so he can't speak, and we can't
Not going to speak.
we can't have material distributed. I'm sorry, but you're welcome to speak. We've got you down to speak. So when you're all seated, you've got the mic on. You'll have 4 minutes between you. Thank you.
My name is Hugo Haig. I'm a local resident and I know the site very well. I fully commend the unique and exceptional design to you. The design of this replacement house is inspired and will add to the diversity and will complement the architectural language of the area.
Thank you. Fundamentally, the proposal will replace an existing lawful dwelling, accessed via an existing track, and provide a new farmhouse for Crux Easton, which is much needed as a sustainable heart of the farmstead. It will bring the following benefits: a truly unique and exceptional design, integrating architecture and landscape, a design approach that fully respects the AONB characteristics, an exemplar of sustainability with huge savings in carbon emissions, 200 times better than a conventional building, over 10 acres of new woodland, over 4,000 new trees, and over 1 kilometre of new hedgerows, over 10 acres of new grassland, wildflower areas, and 2 new ponds, substantial biodiversity net gain of over 3,000%, significant reduction in nitrogen nutrients, maintaining public footpath and bridleway. That is significant. Those will not be moved or impacted. Potential for parish and community use. All of these benefits will be lost if the scheme does not progress. The North East Hampshire Design Review Panel concluded that they were confident that an appropriate scheme could be developed by this design team for this location. An independent review by one of Britain's leading architects and the former president of the Architects Institution, George Ferguson, fully endorsed the scheme. We worked closely with landscape and design officers from the council to adjust the scheme in line with their suggestions. We were therefore very surprised and disappointed when they finally made their objections, largely on subjective grounds. The application has garnered almost unanimous support from the local community, the parish council and local ward councillors. There has also been no objection from Hampshire County Council's Historic Environment and Highways teams, the council's waste management, biodiversity, tree and environmental protection officers, as well as Hampshire Countryside Service, Natural England and the Forestry Commission. The officer's report to members and the reasons refusal failed to reflect fully the facts of the application or acknowledge the existing lawful use of the building which will be replaced. That has no limitations, and those limitations will have a significant impact. It also fails to acknowledge the significant benefits that the proposal will deliver. The reasons for refusal are also inappropriate. We have demonstrated that our proposals are in line with paragraph 84 of the MPPF and also policies in the local plan, including SS6.
You've 1 minute left.
We have provided members with a briefing note that more accurately we feel sets out the benefits of the proposal. It is particularly important that we sent this out because members were not afforded the benefit of a site visit for this application. We have sought an opinion from an independent barrister of King's Counsel who has previously provided the opinion for the lawful development of the lodge. He has fully endorsed our comments and confirmed that members are lawfully entitled to depart from the recommendation given by officers to grant planning permission. If members are minded to approve this evening, we are happy to sign up to a Section 106 agreement that fully sets out all of the benefits of the proposal, but also formally replaces the existing lodge with the new proposal. To conclude, this is the effective replacement of an existing dwelling with the impacts that that has on the area already. A great deal could be gained from permitting the proposals, and nothing of significance will be lost. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillors, do we have any questions for the gentleman opposite? Councillor Howard Sorrell.
Thank you, Chair. Oh yes, your mic is still on, if you could turn that off. Thank you. You seem quite well prepared. I would have asked this of the officers. I probably still will, depending on your answer. The very first line of the reason for refusal say, the proposed development would result in the erection of a new dwelling outside of the settlement policy boundary. Now, I've heard repeatedly that this isn't a new dwelling, this is replacing an existing dwelling. Can you explain where that discrepancy has arisen?
Yes, sorry. I'll give a view, and I would also invite Robert Adam to comment as the architect for the proposal. I don't know why the officers have chosen to conclude as they have done. There is clearly an existing lawful dwelling on this site. We are proposing a new dwelling that will replace that and provide a heart for Crux Eastern Farm, which at the moment it doesn't have. It doesn't have a farmhouse located in the centre of the farm, and it does need that. It's not about having livestock or needing to be near livestock. The farm itself, and to manage a farm of this scale sustainably, it needs a central hub and a central heart, which is what we're trying to achieve here. But at the same time, replacing an existing lawful dwelling. The impacts that are talked about on the local environment are already uncontrolled. That lodge exists. It has a lawful use. The use of that property isn't restricted. So the impacts that are talked about will not be as have been outlined. In fact, the new proposals will improve on that by the enhanced design and the significant benefits that we've set out that will come only as a benefit back of this scheme.
Oh, did you want to? Is my microphone on? Sorry, wrong button. I don't have a great deal to say about why it's been decided to ignore the fact there's a dwelling there already. I can't add much to that. I can talk about the design if you want me to, but I can't add any more on the issue of that.
Yep, of course, yep.
Thank you. From the images and diagrams in our documentation, I can't tell where the existing footprint of the existing site that you're saying exists is in relation to where the new building's footprint will be. Is there an overlap, or is just somewhere within the entire site there is a building and then you're building a new one somewhere else on the site?
Had members had the benefit of a site visit, we could have clearly demonstrated that to you. Officers deemed it wasn't necessary to do that. The plan there shows the location of the lodge, which I think is the red cursor, which is slightly up, and then the position of the new development on the new property as it will come forward. They are very close. And again, I will pass over to the design team to explain why they selected the location and move it. But by moving it inwards, it does a couple of things. It drops it down to a lower elevation within the landscape, therefore reducing any visual impact. The new proposal would be at a lower elevation than the existing lodge. It also moves it further away from the existing footpath, reducing the impact, allowing sort of planting and greening in between the footpath and the development. It also moves it further away from the existing trees, therefore reducing any impact on not only the footpath but also the established mature trees that sit in the woodland adjacent to it. So that is, from my part, part of the reasons for locating it where it is. Robert, did you want to?
My microphone on now? Yes. I think probably Mary-Louise and I should both talk about this. I mean, there's no point in denying the fact this is larger than the existing lodge was. I mean, I'm not going to say it's anything else. But this has to be seen in terms of the additional landscape. Effectively, what's happening is that an area of woodland that was cleared for intensive farming in the 1940s is to a significant extent being restored. So the situation is quite different. So what we now have is a clearing which can allows us in a way to produce a new house in a better position. And you know, again, in the end, I wasn't commissioned to produce another timber lodge, as is probably quite obvious. I was actually commissioned to produce an exceptional piece of architecture. And that's part of what this scheme is. Now, how exceptional it is, of course, is in the end a matter of opinion. But that's what we were supposed to do. But this was where the location of the building, its size and appearance, was very closely worked together with the landscape. This is not a house in isolation. This is a house designed with its landscape. Sorry, a long answer to a short question.
I would say that Patrick and Robert have answered it pretty comprehensively, but I think it's to add to it that actually, contrary to the way it's been portrayed, the house actually works very well with the landscape. It sits in a natural valley that's there. We take advantage of the natural valley to introduce the ability to capture and store water, which in this time of climate change is an incredibly responsible thing to do. You could say it wasn't there originally, but we've now got opportunities and ways that we can capture.
I'm afraid I'm going to have to draw things to a close because it very much looks like you're trying to extend the original presentation. Councillors, do you have any more questions you'd like to ask those speaking in support? Okay, I see no hands raised. So thank you very much all for your contribution. We shall now move to the next stage in determining this application, which is to ask councillors, do you have any questions for officers? Councillor Miller.
Thank you, Chair. Fairly long report, but I've got a couple of points I'd like to raise. I'll raise one first. Did we actually get an input from the North Wessex Downs National Landscape Office on this application?
We consulted them, but we didn't get a response.
It's okay. I worked with that office for 6 years. I know exactly how it works, and the planning officer. Okay, I found we have an assessment in the report 242 onwards, and it's in that area. There's pages of it, and an assessment by the urban design officer. The title sort of, I had to look at the title, and an urban design officer is making an assessment of this rather large, rather imposing building on its own in the countryside. He goes on to say, talk about this panel, the Northeast Design Panel. That's the first time I've ever seen it mentioned. Or have I missed something? Do we defer to that panel for advice from officers in this council? I'd like to understand where they sit.
The design review panel are not a statutory sort of consultee, but their use is strongly encouraged by central government policy as part of the NPPF. And the North East Hampshire Design Review Panel has a role of as a consultee for selected schemes such as this, obviously in terms of it being a paragraph 84 dwelling for an exceptional design, given where it is a dwelling in the countryside and the NPPF guidance. So I can explain that the panel comprises architects, landscape architects and other professionals, such as those within building conservation, and it involves us as a council, Hart District Council and Rushmere Council, and they've been operating since the year 2000, and the panel offers advice free on these applications.
Thank you very much. Councillor Harold Sorrell, did you have a question?
I did, thank you. Much like what I said to them, how do we square that circle? So presumably that image there shows the existing lodge, and the new lodge building, whatever it's called, does not overlap. So it is a new built form on an existing site that contains a different built form. Is that how we take that? And then I also had a second question regarding the viewing panel. Was that an assessment that you made that it wouldn't be necessary for us as members, or is that not entirely accurate?
Thank you, Councillor. So I think the short answer is yes. Your first question is how we've assessed it in terms of being in that regard. In terms of the viewing panel, there's various ways in which it can be called. So the target list goes out in terms of the items members can call that. So the Ward Council didn't, in this occasion, ask for that. Our assessment of it was that from the photographs and the issues that you're considering, we felt that you could consider that from the information before you. Clearly it's before you to come to a different view on that, but that was our assessment of it as we looked at it, given the issues that were raised within the report. There's all varying reasons as to why we do or don't sort of suggest on occasion that you do view things. The majority of them, though, tend to be through member requests.
Councillor Bound.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, how far away would this proposal be from other residences? Any ideas?
On page 252, it's of the agenda, says the nearest dwelling to the application site is Upper Woodcote Farm, located 700 metres away.
Yeah, if you could use the...
Okay, sorry.
Any further questions for officers, councillors? Okay, debate. Councillor Miller.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I referred to this rather long report from the Urban Design Officer. I also found inconsistency. There are contradictions in there. At one point, it said it praises the design of the property. In others, it would be inappropriate within the within national landscape. I'll get used to it sometime. But I also heard from one of the supporters that it was in a natural valley. Now, it can't be both. It can't be prominent and dominant within the AONB if there is a degree of, and I can't get it from the visualizer from these various diagrams, whether it's standing on the top of a rise. It's not. Apparently it's down in a valley in a natural level spot where the existing lodge was. And that could really affect, I think, our perspective of how much we look at this as, if you like, a big pile, I think is the colloquial expression, within the AONB. Now, there are lots of piles within the AONB, I know that for a fact, but this one seems to be very tastefully designed, in my opinion, and it's all subjective, please, I'm not selling anything here, but it has its merits. And to use that as part of the reasons for a refusal, I'm having trouble with, because Councillor Howard-Soul mentioned what price the viewing panel. I think if we had a good look at this terrain and looking at the topography and getting a clear idea of where this would sit within the topography, we've got to come to a reasoned judgment here of whether we support the officer's recommendation or not, and I think that's a factor within it. I am thinking that maybe we could put this into a viewing panel in the future, defer the decision so that we've got a reconstituted Development Control Committee. That's not the reason, but it would be at the next viewing panel, and have a good look at the topography to see what that impact is. Because we heard from one of the objectors, yes, you would see it from one of the public footpaths that run through the area. I have no doubt about it, but any structure that was put there, you would see it in the area from the footpaths. So that's where my thinking is. I'd be appreciative of listening to other members and what they say.
So are you moving that we request a viewing?
Like I said, I'm getting a couple of nods around me. I'll move this for deferment to get a better appreciation for the committee for the position of this particular application within its landscape.
Okay, duly noted. Councillor Court.
I'm happy to second that one.
It's been moved and seconded for viewing. Unless anybody has a burning desire to speak at this point, we can move to vote on that. Those in favour of a viewing, please show. That's carried. Those against, please show. And abstentions, please show. 2. Okay. So I guess the decision is it's going for viewing.
Yeah, the application is deferred for a viewing in the future.
Thank you very much. So the next application up, number 6 on the list, 2301-646 Full, land adjacent to Cufode Manor in Cufode Lane, Bramley. And if we could have the officer introduction, please. I think that's Jess, isn't it? Introduce, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. The 5th item before you this evening is land adjacent to Cuford Manor, Cuford Lane, Bramley, Hampshire. The proposal seeks full planning permission for the erection of a single-storey, 3-bedroom dwelling, together with hard and soft landscaping and on-curtilage parking. So now if I take members' attention to the update paper, this site was subject to the viewings that took place last Friday, and information on this can be found within the update paper. There are no other updates in this regard. So the application is recommended for refusal for 2 reasons relating to isolated development outside of any settlement policy boundary and not meeting any exception policies contrary to SS1 and SS6, and then harm to Great Crested Newts, having regard to the test when obtaining a licence from Natural England. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. So, we don't have any parish council involvement in this one. No people speaking objection either, but we've got down to speaking to support Karen Tipper. Council, you've got your hand raised.
I am, what's the word? Predetermined on this. I'm afraid I'm going to have to remove myself. I should have declared
you need to go now.
An interest
right now. Then, okay. Thank you. Right. Yeah. That declaration should have been made right at the outset of this. Thank you for coming to DC. When you're ready, press the button on your right. You'll have 4 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. The applicants have lived at Cuford Manor for 24 years, and during this time, as part of their stewardship of the former farmstead and its collection of heritage assets, they have invested in the preservation and conservation of each of the assets. The former farmstead character and appearance has been maintained and now has a cluster of 7 dwellings. The applicants wish to remain on site but downsize to a single-storey dwelling. The dwelling which is proposed has been designed to a high sustainable, passive house and lifetime standard. The design has been identified by the Council's Heritage Officer as being of a high design standard and skillfully executed. The dwelling before you this evening is not a simple pastiche interpretation of a rural building, but one which in the future may come to be considered as an asset. Turning to the planning arguments, the purpose of the committee report is to provide you, as members of this committee, with a balanced assessment of the case. Unfortunately, we do not believe that you have been provided with that balance. The report has referred back on several occasions to the 2016 application and subsequent appeal, providing you with extracts of the inspector's view on the interpretation of isolation relevant to policy SS6. However, it has failed to provide you with extracts of the interpretation of previously developed land and how this applies to policy SS6A. The officer report states that the site is not PDL. However, within the previous appeal, the council concluded, as too did the inspector, that the site did in fact form PDL. That being the case, the report should have assessed the application on this basis against SS6A. It has not. Instead, it has assessed the application solely on SS6E, again referring back to the previous appeal issued in 2017. At that time, the local plan was 8 months old. The developments at Razors Farm and Upper Cufford Farm had not been granted, let alone constructed. The character of Cufford Lane and proximity to the settlement boundary was therefore vastly different. The committee report has provided you with examples of other sites granted planning permission for new dwellings along Cufford Lane. Each of these are more isolated than ours. We've submitted numerous examples where more isolated dwellings have been allowed elsewhere across the borough. We hope that you have seen our submissions. It is critical that the council apply policies consistently across the whole borough. The house is not isolated. As mentioned, it sits within a cluster of 7 dwellings with a clear defensible boundary forming part of the former farmstead. The planning report concludes that the site is disassociated with the historic farmstead. This is in direct conflict with the council's own heritage officer, who notes the site has the feel of enclosure and part of the farmstead complex, and therefore historically not unreasonable for a barn-type structure to be sited in this area. It is evident in our view that the first reason for refusal is not based on a sound assessment or consistent with advice offered by other officers. Turning to the second reason for refusal, the applicant was only advised of this reason 12 days ago, some 6 months following conclusion of the council's biodiversity officer that the Great Crested Newt surveys and proposed mitigation was acceptable and no concerns raised, and some 8 months following when the application should have been determined. The report states that the application, if the application had been recommended for approval, conditions would have been applied. If you conclude this evening that the site is not isolated, then it is entirely reasonable for you to equally conclude that the ecological measures proposed are acceptable as per your own officer's conclusions, and we therefore request that you approve this application. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillors, do we have any questions for Ms Tipper? I see no hands. Oh, Councillor Miller.
Your last point on the item number 2 for refusal, if this would have been approved, would the applicant have accepted conditions to supply any mitigation and improvements into the habitat or the highways, I believe they're called, for the transition of wildlife?
So the applicant has already provided a very detailed mitigation strategy, which has been prepared following the council's biodiversity officer comments requesting that it be prepared on the basis of anticipating a Natural England licence application. So it already sets out very detailed measures that would be included as part of that. And yes, in answer to that, the applicant would be willing to accept a condition to secure those mitigation measures set out in that report submitted.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, no further questions. Thank you very much for your contribution. I think at this point we need to have some clarification on the derogation tests. So mitigation is the third of those tests, and tests 1 and 2 needs to be passed. I don't know if we need any more expansion on that from the officers to explain that.
Chair, it's as you described and as set out in the report, the derogation tests work in a sort of a sequential way that they have to pass a sort of overall public interest test. There's no suitable alternatives before you then move to mitigation. So the mitigation would only become relevant if you consider that the first 2 tests were passed.
And that's on page 312 of the agenda. Okay, next up, Councillor Tomlin. Welcome back to DC. Doesn't seem that long ago when you're sitting on this side. That's true. So you know the drill. When you're ready, 4 minutes.
So good evening, members. So again, I will back up everything you've just heard. It's much what I was going to say, but so I won't repeat it. It is a modest bungalow. It's very keen it's going to be built to passive house standards, and we are desperate to reach our carbon zero target by 2030, so we've got to welcome this type of construction. You've heard it's like a lifetime home for old age proof, if I may be that cruel to the applicant, but maybe we should be considering this under policy CM4 as housing for older people and specialist housing. It's going to be wheelchair friendly, it's going to be single story. He wants to move there in his later life. I called this in back in December last year. The application went in July last year. The last piece of information required was submitted in October. It's taken over 5 months to get it to today's committee. It was bounced from agenda to agenda because it was low priority, and in the words of the case officer, more time-sensitive applications were put in front of it. So I don't think we've been treating this resident particularly fairly. But back to the reasons for refusal, this isolation. Those people, members rather, who came on the site viewing, in my opinion, and indeed the man in the street, this application is not, you can't see it as an isolated form of development. Again, this is with my 35 years of intimate local knowledge and the last 10 years or so as a ward councillor and serving on this committee. The plot sits within the curtilage of the old manor. You've heard about previously developed land. It's intimately adjoined to their built form. Within 1 kilometre each way of the site along the lane, there are 31 houses. 6 of them have just been built in 2023. 300 metres up the road is a 16-unit business park. Access to doctors and the all-important railway station is closer than the new Vine Park housing estate. People there have to travel further through Chinham to reach their nearest doctors and even further to the same railway station. They all drive to the nearest shop, some 3 kilometres away. This site, the Razors Farm, was justified by the planning inspector for its closeness to services of Chinham and the Bramley railway station. The school at the new Upper Cuffold site will be within 1 kilometre of this site, which places this application as having one of the shortest distances to access a school. So the Upper Cuffold site has full permission and it will be built within 500 metres of this with 350 more homes. So I hope you'll agree it can't be regarded as isolated. Now we come to this Great Crested Newt issue, and you've seen that the biodiversity officer is happy the mitigation could be put in place.
1 minute left.
Right, this is it's very strange, as I do not ever recall these tests being referred to at DC committee in my 10 years. I also did not see them publicised in any way for the Upper Cuffold site, which is also close to this newt conurbation, and the toad migration also referred to in the report. Indeed, the 106 agreement for the Upper Cuffold development provides for a toad tunnel under the road to help the toad migration. However, this tunnel is proposed to be constructed in the verge, or the ditch, just outside this application site, as the most convenient place for its construction. The newts do not migrate with the toads, but those newts in this area might well suffer in the construction and siting of this structure. The derogation tests have conveniently been ignored for this, and it's been agreed as a requirement of the Upper Cuffold strategic site, as it's been approved. So I could go into all of this. Some of you might remember the Great Crested Newt issue in Marnhill Park. That was overcome with mitigation and tunnels and everything, and apparently, according to Natural Basingstoke, it's working really well. So it can be done. I could go into the derogation tests. I'm running out of time. But at the end of the day, you have to decide whether actually this application meets that, and our biodiversity officer's comments are valid, and the small amount of newts around here, would they be harmed?
And I'm afraid you are out of time. But thank you very much for your contribution to Councillor Tomlin. Councillors, do we have any questions for Councillor Tomlin? I see no hands raised, so you're off the hook. Thanks very much for your contribution. Right, so next step in the process is questions for officers. Do we have any questions for officers, councillors? Councillor Miller.
You've heard from the ward councillor. It's also written down in the report about these distances to settlement policy boundaries and definitions of isolation. On that basis, may I ask officers, are they still of the opinion that this site and this application is isolated in the countryside?
Yes, so I think to be consistent with decisions that the council have made in the past, especially the site opposite, yeah, that's the, yeah.
We are always instructed on this committee to take a site as it's put before us, not consistent or precedented decisions that have been made in the past. I ask the question, in this case, do we see and do you maintain that it's still isolated? That's all I'm asking.
Yes, yeah.
Thank you.
Councillor Court?
Regards the second reason for refusal, you said the proposed development would result in harm. Do you mean would result or would potentially result?
So I think that's quoted from the, yeah, it would, yeah.
Sorry, Councillor, is your question about reason for refusal too? I didn't quite catch the question when you said, yeah, we're saying that it would result in harm, yes.
Any more questions? Councillor Bound?
Yeah. A couple of meetings ago, when it was to do with bats out in the Newbury direction, that particular application, is this of a similar reason for refusal to here? Is that of a similar weight to the reason for refusal for the bats at that particular for farm development?
Yes, it's the same test that we're applying.
Any more questions for officers? Okay, we'll move to debate. Anyone wish to start? Don't see anybody. Councillor Miller?
I'll kick it off again. I'm not going to get into a big discussion. Cuffield Lane, like Councillor Tomlin, is right on both our patches. We know it extremely well. And reading what I read in the report about previous comments by inspectors and assessments, and understanding SS6 only too well now, I just cannot support the officer's recommendation. I'm leaving it at that because it isn't isolated. It's not going to be isolated in the future with approved developments all around it. It's almost making a bit of a mockery of the word isolation and given the rules. At one stage it probably was, but the world has moved on. And in all conscience, I cannot give any support to the officer's recommendation here, and I'm not moving anything, Chair.
Okay, so you're not moving. Yeah, do you want to come in on this, Mike?
Thank you, Chair. It's just on that point, and absolutely respect members come to their own views on their overall assessment. I just want to make the point that the test of whether it meets SS6 is not on the isolation point only. The isolation point is one element of SS6. So it's absolutely before the committee to disagree with the officer's assessment in that regard, if you're applying your judgment as to how you see the site in its physical surroundings, etc., in terms of the isolation point. And you may come to the view that actually that reason for refusal one shouldn't include the words and as such would be considered isolated. That's before you. But the overriding point is the point that we've raised previously, which is that there isn't, in our assessment of the application, a means by which this fits within SS6. Isolation is one element of how you then assess that. So I hope that helps, councillors.
Councillor Freeman, you had your hand raised.
Thank you, Chair. Quite aside from the reasons for the first reason for refusal, I think with the second reason for refusal, there are strict laws around protected species, and if this application is failing to meet the first two derogation tests, then I don't see how we can approve it.
Are you moving refusal in that case?
Yes, I will move refusal.
Thank you very much. Councillor Bound.
I will second that on the same basis that Angie Freeman has put forward.
Thank you very much. We have a live proposal on the table, moved and seconded. All those in favour, please show. Yep. And those against? And abstentions? 2. Okay, so that's carried. If we could have the decision, please.
Thank you, Chairman. To confirm, the application is recommended for refusal as per the reasons set out in... is refused as per the reasons set out in page 20 of the 290 of the agenda. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And last but not least, application number 7, reference 23027771, full land adjacent to Redlands, Little Knoll Hill, Brimpton Common. And Jess, if you could introduce this one, please.
Thank you, Chair. The 6th item before you this evening is land adjacent to Redlands, Little Knoll Hill, Brimpton Common, Hampshire. The proposal seeks full planning permission for the erection of a detached lifetime home with associated garage, car parking and driveway. Now, if I take members' attention to the update paper, this site was subject to the viewings that took place last Friday, and information on this can be found within the update paper. There are also further updates following the site visit, namely clarification was sought on site in relation to a nearby bus stop. So the number 44 bus is operated by West Berkshire Council and operates on Tuesday, Thursday and Friday twice daily, and on Monday and Wednesday as a single service. So it's considered to be infrequent and unlikely to be utilised by future occupants. So the assessment is unchanged in this regard. Within the update paper, the agent has also provided rebuttal comments with regards to refusal reason number 2. The application is recommended for refusal for 3 reasons relating to unsustainable form of development, contrary to SS1 and SS6 of the local plan, poor level of amenity for future occupiers in terms of private amenity spaces, and it wouldn't promote sustainable transport, so contrary to CN9 of the local plan. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. So we don't have any parish council or anyone speaking objection. In support, we have Caroline Downey. Thank you for your patience. When you're ready, if you'd like to approach. And when you press the button, you'll have 4 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Members, thank you for your time this evening. The site here adjacent to Redlands, on the outskirts of Tadley, is a corner plot that is next door to Tadley Caleather Youth Football Ground. Although there is no specific policy in relation to infill sites, this application would enable the applicant to create a home for him and his family. The site has good amenity links with Tadley and further afield to Thatcham and Reading, which can be accessed using the number 44 bus that runs at least twice a day in the working week in each direction. Having highlighted this to officers, they still wish to leave it as a reason for refusal as the bus doesn't operate at weekends. However, number 2 bus stop, which is just outside the Hurst School, which is approximately 800 metres away and takes you to Basingstoke every 15 to 20 minutes, including weekends, and therefore, in our opinion, is sustainable. The second reason for refusal is that the site will suffer from privacy concerns from neighbouring property. There is no right to own your view. There is also no expectation of privacy in urban or semi-urban areas. If this was the case, then very little housing would be built. The officer states on their report on page 332 that the size, siting and design of the proposed dwelling is considered to be appropriate and would not dominate or detract from the visual amenities of the area or character and appearance of the surrounding area. It is therefore considered the development would accord with EM1 and EM10. The main reason for refusal, therefore, is the scheme does not justify a move away from the development plan, and yet it is nearby to the facilities of Tadley. There are a number of views on the changes to the NPPF in December. Most pertinent, in our opinion, is paragraph 76, that is in relation to the housing land supply. It is our opinion that this scheme was submitted prior to December the 19th and should be considered under the policies at the time of submission and not the subsequent changes, but officers do not concur. In the national guidance set out in support of the changes to the NPPF and published on the 5th of February 24, the update stated as follows. Paragraph 76 of the NPPF is not a material consideration for applications made before the 19th of December 2023. It is therefore our opinion that this application should have been considered under the housing land supply shortfall at the time. If officers agreed, as some inspectors do, then this application would have been considered here at committee, but with a recommendation for approval. The site would provide a single dwelling. These single dwellings continue to provide a buffer, as I've discussed before, to the council and their 4 or 5 year housing land supply. Throughout the new changes of the NPPF, it is our opinion that the Secretary of State is encouraging the building of new homes, not trying to thwart development. The single dwelling also complies with paragraph 70, which states of the NPPF, which states small and medium-sized sites can make an important contribution to meeting the housing requirement of an area and are often built out relatively quickly. Finally, aside from a few local objections, not a single statutory consultee objected to the proposal. The only consultee who objected was Brimpton Parish Council on the grounds of access, and yet the statutory consultee, Hampshire Highways, did not object. I'd like to thank you for all coming to site to see the site and seeing how close it is, I hope you agree, to Tadley and its facilities. Should you decide to approve this application, then it could be approved on the grounds that the application does comply with EM10, EM4 and CN9 amongst others, and these are material considerations in the overall planning balance where the benefit of additional dwelling in this highly sustainable location outweighs any harm. Many thanks.
Thank you very much. Do we have any questions for Mrs Downey? Councillors, I see no hands raised. Thank you very much indeed for your contribution. Questions for officers? Councillor Miller, followed by Councillor Bowes.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, looking at where we drove in and the lots of houses we passed, is there a settlement policy boundary aspect to all this? Because I noticed in the first reason for refusal, it's in the countryside.
Yes, so it's outside of any settlement policy boundary.
It's outside the which?
There's no settlement policy boundary.
Oh, there is none in that area?
Not for Brimpton Common, no.
Okay.
Councillor Bowes.
Thank you, Chair. We're here about when we should be judging it as to what was in force at the time. We're hearing on the one hand in the applicant's opinion. Is it opinion or is it law as to when we judge this? What time it came in?
So it's quite clear in the NPPF that it's footnote 8 of the NPPF that just says, shall I read out? Sorry. This includes for applications involving the provision of housing situation where the local plan authority cannot demonstrate a 5-year supply, as set out in paragraph 226 of the deliverable housing sites, and does not benefit from the provisions of paragraph 76. So paragraph 76 is the paragraph which mentions about,
Thank you. So yeah, I think the issue is there's been reference to transitional arrangements. Our clear view is that those do not apply in the way that's been described. I appreciate that's a view that others may hold, and entirely understand that. The way in which you need to consider an application is based on the policy in place at the time. Those transitional arrangements don't mean that you can apply them retrospectively in that regard. That's the way certainly we've been determining applications since. That's the way appeal decisions, including that one that I mentioned at the beginning, have been determined based on the current position. So that has supported the view that those transitional arrangements don't apply.
Thank you.
Councillor Miller.
If I'm allowed a second chance question, Chair.
Oh,
thank you.
go on.
Thank you. I think what I'm looking at in that first reason for refusal is a little bit more expansion on the reason why it's not considered to represent a sustainable form of development. Because sustainability has got many, many factors, and we've had many, many discussions about sustainability. But it's that statement that goes on to reinforce the policies of it's not, there's no policy to support it because it's not sustainable. In what areas of sustainability does it fall down on? Is my question.
So that's really in regards to page 330 of the report. So it's in regards to access to services and facilities.
Councillor, if I can just add to Jess's response as well, it's absolutely right. In addition to that, I suppose there's the inherent point around sustainability. You know, the settlement policy boundaries and the distinction between countryside and settlement boundaries has been drawn thinking around where development is or isn't sustainable in its entirety. So the starting point is if it's in the countryside and doesn't fall within any of the policies of SS6, inherently there is an element of unsustainability to it. In addition to that, as set out in the reasons for refusal, there is the aspect of sustainability in relation to access to facilities and services in terms of public transport, etc. So it's those two aspects, but you can refuse simply on the basis that it's not, again, development plan led, is not in accordance with policy SS6 in itself.
Thank you. But you can see our confusion here when we've got a good bus service. It's not very far from shops. That's fairly sustainable in this day and age.
Okay. Do we have any more questions for officers? Okay. Moving on to debate then. Do we have anyone who wants to start debate off? Councillor Bound, is you shaping to speak there?
Yes, back to the sustainability bit. I mean, I'm a bit bemused by Councillor Miller saying it's got within a good bus service. The bus service is not very good. You have to access it on a very, very difficult bit of road, to say the least. And whilst the number 2 bus to Basingstoke is a very regular bus, it is at least 800 metres, I would say, away from the site, down a straight road, but a very, very busy road that eventually ends up at the Hurst School, and then you have to go into Woodlands Road to actually access the bus. So I don't think the bus service points to it being a very sustainable site. The other thing, of course, is that the nearest shop, I would say, would be Tesco's, and that's up Woodlands. It's followed to the bus route, to the number 2 bus route, up Woodlands Road, down Heath End Road, and eventually you'll reach Tesco's, which is quite a considerable distance away. Not maybe as the crow flies, but certainly in terms of driving. So it's a site, I would say, that is not really accessible to walkers, is possibly accessible to cyclists, because there is a track that goes down by the side of the football field, and it's a sort of a shortcut, perhaps not a shortcut in the winter. So on the sustainability side, I wouldn't say it is particularly sustainable. I don't think it's particularly an isolated site, though, because there is quite a lot of development around and about there. I think in the report it mentions a pub. Well, it's no longer a pub. It's acting as a car outlet, car sales outlet now. It's no longer a pub, unfortunately. So again, it's if you want to access a pub, it's quite a long way away. That's all I would say in terms of sustainability. It also, to my mind, doesn't seem to fit SS6E, and we've already had a lot of discussion about that this evening.
Thank you, Councillor Blount. Are you prepared to move the recommendation or refusal or approval?
I would like to hear what other people have got to say, Chair, first, please.
Duly noted. Anyone else want to say anything at this point? Councillor Howard-Sorrell?
I'm convinced by Councillor Bound and the reasons for refusal set out in the report. I think they constitute fairly valid reasons for refusal, so I'm happy to move the recommendation.
Thank you very much. Councillor Bells?
I was going to say the same thing. Thank you.
Are you happy to second then? So I have a motion on the table, moved and seconded. Those in favour, please show. 6, okay. Those against, 1. No abstentions. If we can have the decision recorded, please.
Thank you, Chair. So to confirm, the application is refused as per the reasons set out in page 321 of the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and you'll be pleased to know that item 8, the section 106 variation, has been withdrawn. So that concludes our business this evening. Thank you everyone for your attendance. Meeting is closed just before 9 o'clock. Thank you very much.